Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter characters are incredibly colourful. Each has their own strengths and weaknesses, quirks, flaws and virtues. Overall, the films did an excellent job of bringing these characters from page to screen, but they couldn't completely avoid differences. Sometimes these differences meant that characters in the movies became noticeably stronger than their book counterparts. Let's look at some of the most striking examples. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Hungarian Horn Tail. In Goblet of Fire, Harry takes part in the Triwizard Tournament, where the first task is to steal the golden egg from the Hungarian Horntail. Both in the book and in the film, he chooses the same strategy, flying on his broom. But the book version is much simpler. Harry just distracts the dragon by climbing higher and higher until it leaves the nest. In the film, though, the scene turns into a real spectacle. The dragon doesn't give Harry a moment to breathe, breaks free from its chains, and ultimately chases him over Hogwarts' roofs and towers, turning it all into an exhilarating pursuit. Number 2. Hermione Granger. Hermione remains one of the saga's most beloved heroines, smart, determined, and driven. In the films, her character largely retains her book traits, but her abilities are made even more impressive, largely by transferring some of Ron's achievements to her. As a result, the Golden Trio lost some of its balance. In the books, Hermione is talented but not flawless. She lacks imagination, is often overly rule-bound, and her bluntness and obsession with studying create problems in her relationships with others. The films removed these shortcomings, turning Hermione into an almost perfect figure, someone who can handle any task. Number 3. Dumbledore. Dumbledore was already one of the most powerful wizards, but the films elevated his might to an even more impressive level. Just look at his spectacular duel with Voldemort in the Ministry of Magic, filled with powerful spells and fiery whirlwinds. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore effortlessly floods the Horcrux cave with massive fire, while in the book that flame is described much more modestly. The film also has him apparating freely right from the astronomy tower, even though in the book he and Harry have to leave the castle grounds first. When Harry expresses surprise at this skill, Dumbledore just smiles and calls it a headmaster privilege. Number 4. Harry Potter. To make the movies more dynamic, the creators also powered up Harry himself. This is especially noticeable in the final installment. His duel with Voldemort becomes a tense, nearly equal showdown. In the books, it's much more down-to-earth. Harry runs and hides, and when he finally faces Voldemort, he doesn't do anything spectacular, just uses Expelliarmus. Voldemort dies because the Elder Wand refused to obey him. In the film, their duel feels like a clash of two mighty wizards, with Harry appearing much braver and stronger. Number 5. Dolores Umbridge. Umbridge is undoubtedly one of the saga's most vivid antagonists. Her sickly, sweet manners, cruel methods, and poisonous prejudice against Muggleborns made her arguably more hated than Voldemort himself. The films did an excellent job bringing Umbridge's character to the screen, but in the centaur scene, she's shown as much more confident than in the book. In the original, the centaurs carry her off into the forest without much trouble, while in the film she manages to incapacitate one of them and keeps her composure right up until Grawp grabs her in his massive hand. Number 6. Severus Snape. Severus Snape never asked to be admired. In the books he stayed cold and unreadable, a man who hid behind sarcasm and scorn. When McGonagall challenged him in Deathly Hallows, the duel was brief. A few spells flew. Snape deflected her curses and broke a window to escape. The text never described him as unstoppable. He was clever and quick, but not a spectacle. The film transformed that moment into something close to legend. As McGonagall advanced, Snape lifted both arms and blocked her attacks with a sweeping shield of light. Sparks hissed across the flagstones. When Flitwick and Sprout joined in, he twisted his wand in a graceful arc, deflecting all three opponents at once. His cloak snapped behind him as if the air itself bowed to his will. For a moment, he looked untouchable. Then, with one smooth motion, He blasted the carrows aside, almost as if protecting them, and vanished in a thunderclap of smoke. The students stared at the empty doorway. This Snape was not just a bitter man skulking through dark corridors. He was a master of magic, a force no one could pin down, not even Hogwarts itself. Number 7, Minerva McGonagall. Minerva McGonagall always carried a quiet authority. In the books, she was strict and brilliant. She could transfigure animals and duel-skilled wizards, but she rarely showed off. When Harry thought of her, he felt respect tinged with fear. In Deathly Hallows, she joined Professors Flitwick and Sprout to cast enchantments over the castle. They worked as a team, layering protections before Voldemort attacked. She never claimed the spotlight. The films decided she deserved it. In Deathly Hallows Part 2, McGonagall stepped forward alone. Her voice rang out across the battlements. "Pietotum locomotor!" she shouted. The stone soldiers groaned to life, pulling themselves free from the walls. Their shields slammed into place. She watched them march away with a fierce pride. Then she turned to Molly Weasley and whispered, "I've always wanted to use that spell." Her duel with Snape was even more striking. In the book, Snape fled quickly after exchanging a few curses. The movie turned it into a spectacular clash. Sparks showered the floor as they hurled spells at each other. McGonagall's face was set in iron. She drove Snape back across the hall with such force that he deflected a hex into the carrows behind him. The students gasped. For the first time, they saw exactly how powerful their strict transfiguration teacher could be. When the battle began, McGonagall did not hide behind younger witches and wizards. She strode into the chaos, robes billowing. Every spell she cast seemed to crack the air. The movie made sure no one would ever mistake her for a simple instructor. She was the shield of Hogwarts, and she would not let it fall. Number 8, Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Lestrange never pretended to be sane. In the books, she was fierce and devoted to Voldemort, but her magic did not tower over the rest. She dueled fiercely in the Department of Mysteries, and she murdered Sirius Black with a single curse. When she shrieked, "I killed Sirius Black!" her voice was wild. Still, she did not stand alone against armies. She remained part of a group of Death Eaters, dangerous but not unstoppable. The films gave her a more terrifying presence. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she stormed the burrow with Fenrir Greyback, setting fire to everything in sight. Flames curled into the sky as she laughed. She looked untouchable, almost inhuman. No other Death Eater dared to shout over her. When she fled, her black cloak melted into the darkness, as if the night itself obeyed her. Her final duel with Molly Weasley in Deathly Hallows Part 2 became an unforgettable spectacle. In the book, the fight was quick. Molly shouted, "Not my daughter, you bitch!" and struck her down in a single powerful spell. The text left no time for flourish, but the film stretched those seconds into a fierce battle. Bellatrix fired curses so fast they split the floor. She threw back Molly's attacks. With a flick of her wrist, her smile never faded. It took everything Molly had to break through her defense. The final blast hit Bellatrix in the chest and turned her to stone before she shattered into dust. No other villain in the series died like that. The effect was clear. The movie wanted everyone to see that Bellatrix Lestrange was more than a mad killer. She was a storm in human form, and only another mother's fury could end her. Number 9, Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom had never looked like a hero. In the first book, he was the boy with the round face and trembling hands. He lost his toad, dropped his books, and stammered when Snape glared at him. But even then, Dumbledore saw something rare. "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies," he said, "but just as much to stand up to our friends." Neville had courage in his heart, though few noticed it. In the Deathly Hallows book, Neville kills Nagini almost by chance. He draws the sword of Gryffindor during the confusion and swings it clean through the snake's neck. The moment matters, but it happens in a rush. He does not speak. The text only says that Voldemort screamed when his final Horcrux died. Neville remains a loyal fighter, but not quite a legend. The film gave him a voice. In front of everyone, Death Eaters, the Hogwarts survivors, Voldemort himself, Neville limps forward. His face is battered, his clothes torn, but his spirit burns bright. He tells Voldemort that Harry lives in all of them. "We lost Harry tonight," he says, "but he's still with us, in here." His hand thumps his chest. The words ring louder than any spell. Then, as the Dark Lord laughs, Neville draws the sword from the sorting hat in one smooth motion. The blade flashes in the grey dawn. He charges Nagini, and the camera holds steady as he strikes. The head falls to the dust. Silence sweeps over the battlefield. In that moment, Neville Longbottom becomes the hero he was always meant to be. Number 10. Lucius Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy was always a serpent in fine robes. In the books, he preferred whispers to wands. He threatened with influence, never with open spells. When Dumbledore dismissed him from the school governor post, Lucius only narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "You will regret this." He never drew his wand in the middle of Hogwarts. His menace came from quiet threats and the weight of the Malfoy name. But in Chamber of Secrets, the film decided he needed sharper fangs. After Harry freed Dobby with the trick of the sock, Lucius lost his careful mask. He raised his wand and his voice dropped to a growl. "Avada," he began, the curse so close to the tip of his tongue that the air around him seemed to darken. For a heartbeat, the audience could almost believe he would murder a 12-year-old boy in broad daylight. The moment snapped when Dobby lifted a small hand and blasted Lucius across the hall. His fine hair flew around his furious face. The camera lingered on him as he staggered to his feet, shocked that a house elf had dared to strike back. That humiliation made Lucius look even more dangerous. He no longer felt like a pure-blood aristocrat who only schemed behind closed doors. He looked like a man who could snap and kill when his pride was wounded. That single scene never appeared in the text. Rowling's Lucius would have sneered and walked away. But the film wanted something darker. It showed how quickly all his polished manners could fall apart. In that instant, Lucius Malfoy became not just a cunning manipulator, but a predator with his teeth bared. Number 11, Remus Lupin. Remus Lupin was always gentle when he taught defense against the dark arts. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he spoke softly as he showed the class how to banish a boggart. "Ridiculous!" he called, turning the shape of fear into something harmless. The students admired him, but he never boasted. He preferred quiet knowledge over any display of power. In the books, even during dangerous times, Lupin often stayed in the background, his courage hidden behind calm words. But the film Order of the Phoenix transformed him into a visible force. When Harry and his friends burst into the Department of Mysteries, Lupin was there, wand raised, eyes steady. He fought side by side with Sirius Black and Kingsley Shacklebolt. Spells exploded against the walls. Lupin cast shields so strong they sent Death Eaters reeling across the floor. For the first time, viewers saw the werewolf professor unleash his full strength. The duel in the Hall of Prophecy was fierce. Lupin moved swiftly, blocking curses aimed at Neville Longbottom. His voice was clear over the chaos. "Stay behind me!" he shouted, pushing the young wizards back as he fired streaks of red light. In the book, the moment is brief, a few lines of description. In the film, it stretches into a tense sequence that shows Lupin as a warrior and protector, not just a tired man with too many regrets. When Sirius fell through the veil, Lupin was the one who caught Harry around the chest. He held him back with iron arms while Bellatrix's laughter echoed off the stones. That final image burned into memory. Lupin's face twisted in pain, but his hands still steady. A man strong enough to save others, even as he was losing the only family he had left. Number 12, Fleur Delacour. Fleur Delacour was never meant to be just a pretty face, though the books often treated her that way. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire she competes as the Beauxbatons champion, but Rowling writes her as nervous and sometimes overwhelmed. When Harry saves her sister Gabrielle from the lake, Fleur hugs him and says, "You saved her, even though she was not yours to save." It is a touching moment, but her magic never feels particularly formidable. She remains more a graceful figure in the background than a true rival to the other champions. The films changed this impression almost immediately. In The Deathly Hallows, Part 1, Fleur becomes an active member of the Order of the Phoenix. She volunteers without hesitation to be one of the decoys during the escape from Privet Drive. She transforms into a copy of Harry, standing in Molly Weasley's kitchen with a determined glare. Her face no longer looks delicate or anxious. Instead, she is resolute, ready to fight Death Eaters in the sky. Later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, the camera finds Fleur in the Great Hall, standing alongside Bill and defending the wounded. There is no suggestion that she wants to run or hide. She moves with her wand lifted, shielding others from falling rubble and dark curses. In the books, she stays mostly on the sidelines, but in the movie she becomes a witch who can hold her ground in the chaos. When Voldemort's forces finally breach the castle, Fleur does not flinch. She duels beside Arthur Weasley and Kingsley Shacklebolt as explosions shake the stone walls. Her spells flash blue and white. This was the version of Fleur that many viewers remembered, a fighter rather than an ornament, a woman whose courage shone brighter than any charm she carried. Number 13. Sirius Black. Sirius Black, the man who had once haunted every wizard's nightmares as the infamous escapee from Azkaban, always carried within him the powerful contradiction of danger and warmth. In the books, J.K. Rowling built him as a figure of charismatic recklessness, the embodiment of a life misspent on rebellion and loss. Yet for all the rumors of his prowess, his actual displays of magical might remained fleeting. When readers first glimpsed him in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he was gaunt and ragged, his brilliance hidden beneath layers of trauma. The memory of the bright young marauder was buried under 12 years of confinement. Even when he returned to the Order of the Phoenix, much of his magic happened off-page, or was implied rather than shown. It was in the films that Sirius was allowed to step into the full light of his legend, particularly during the battle within the Department of Mysteries, where Gary Oldman's portrayal gave him the fierce gravitas that the books only suggested in whispers. The duel between Sirius Black and Bellatrix Lestrange in the Ministry of Magic stands as a moment when cinematic adaptation surpassed the source material's sparse description. In the book, the encounter is swift and almost understated. Sirius taunts Bellatrix briefly, calling out, "Come on, you can do better than that," before she strikes him with a curse that sends him through the veil. The brevity of it feels brutal, a sudden extinguishing of light. But the film expands those seconds into a sweeping choreography of spellfire and defiance. Sirius does not simply fall, he duels her with a graceful ferocity that leaves no doubt of his mastery. The camera captures each movement, the tension in his jaw, the easy arrogance as he flicks curses and blocks hexes with effortless precision. This is the Sirius Black that Remus Lupin once knew, a wizard of immense talent and nerve, finally unshackled from memory and regret. During that duel, Sirius is depicted as almost unassailable, parrying Bellatrix's attacks with a fierce grin that borders on exultation. There is a moment in the film when he spins to cast a blazing spell that knocks Bellatrix off her feet, and for that instant he appears nearly invincible. The intensity of his expression reflects not only the adrenaline of combat, but the joy of standing beside his godson, fighting for something beyond vengeance. The book describes Sirius as laughing, but the film shows that laughter as the war cry of a man rediscovering his purpose. Even as curses slice through the air, he seems to embody a recklessness that is as much strength as it is foreshadowing of his fall. The cinematic Sirius is not simply a fugitive or a mentor in hiding. He becomes an action hero in the tradition of defiant warriors, his dueling style filled with flourishes that elevate him above the grim desperation that clings to other characters. One sees this most vividly in the way he strides across the dais, wand never wavering, as if daring Bellatrix to try harder. Each spell he unleashes is a declaration that Azkaban had not broken him, that he remained the brilliant and dangerous wizard the Ministry feared. The decision to frame Sirius this way adds weight to his death, transforming it from a moment of quiet horror into an unforgettable tragedy. The audience witnesses the peak of his power and charisma, only to have it vanish in an instant, leaving behind the echo of his taunting laughter. In the books, Sirius's power is more often conveyed indirectly. Harry recalls that James Potter and Sirius were the cleverest students of their year, that even the older Slytherins learned to avoid provoking them. Dumbledore remarks in The Order of the Phoenix, Sirius was a brave, clever man, but much of his courage takes the form of impulsive acts, rushing to the Ministry, defying orders, living with a perpetual impatience that hints at the toll of imprisonment. The films seize on these qualities but reimagine them as strengths rather than flaws. Where Rowling shows Sirius as a man desperate to matter, the films allow him to be the hero he once was, even if only for a few blazing moments. There is a telling contrast in how the book and film depict Sirius's final stand. In the novel, Harry perceives a sense of surprise on Sirius's face when the curse hits him, as though he had never expected the end to come so quickly. The text reads, "The second jet of light hit him squarely on the chest. The laughter had not quite died from his face, but his eyes widened in shock." That detail, the shock, underscores his vulnerability, his failure to understand that Bellatrix was willing to kill him without hesitation. The film, however, does not linger on surprise. Instead, Sirius's expression remains almost triumphant, his grin fading only as he drifts backward, his body dissolving into the veil. In that image there is no question of defeat, only the finality of fate. He dies, not as a victim, but as a warrior caught between two worlds. Sirius's confident demeanor in the film is punctuated by the way he speaks to Harry in the middle of the battle. He calls him "Nice one, James," after Harry disarms Lucius Malfoy, a line absent from the books, but powerfully evocative of the past. In that moment, the film collapses time, showing Sirius as a man who never truly left the days of the Marauders behind. The quip is light-hearted and poignant, a reminder that for all his power, Sirius was still haunted by memory. But unlike in the books where this nostalgia seems pitiable, the film frames it as a moment of connection and pride. He is not merely clinging to ghosts, he is celebrating Harry's strength, as though the past and present had finally reconciled. Number 14. Fenrir Greyback. In the dimly lit corridors of the final battle at Hogwarts, few figures appeared as singularly predatory as Fenrir Greyback. The film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows transformed Greyback from the lurking spectre of lupine menace he had been in the books into an active, leering beast who did not merely terrify but inflicted violence with his own claws. On screen, Greyback was no longer content to be an insinuated horror. He became a visceral, physical predator who roamed the shattered stone hallways in search of blood, his filthy hair matted around his face and his yellow eyes glinting with hunger. He slashed at defenders with a frenzied purpose that the written word never dared to fully articulate. Even in human form, he looked more like a creature dragged from a graveyard than a man with a rational mind. It was this amplified depiction that etched him into the memories of viewers as something far more immediate and grotesque than the unsettling figure glimpsed in Rowling's prose. The book certainly laid the groundwork for this horror. Rowling described Greyback as the werewolf who delighted in attacking children, leaving them scarred and cursed. He was characterized by a sadistic philosophy, deliberately infecting as many victims as possible. In Half-Blood Prince, Remus Lupin refers to him in hushed terms, explaining, Fenrir Greyback is perhaps the most savage werewolf alive today. He prefers children, bites them, infects them. Yet while this reputation is chilling, Greyback rarely emerges in person to fulfill it. He appears sporadically, looming at the periphery of raids or battles, but his actual actions remain mostly off-page, recounted second-hand or hinted at with unsettling brevity. In Deathly Hallows, for example, it is only after the fact that Bill Weasley is described as having been mauled. He was bitten by Greyback, Lupin says, and the consequences are discussed more than the attack itself is depicted. The horror is psychological, born of suggestion. Contrast this with the film's portrayal, which rejects any restraint. Director David Yates chose to present Greyback as the harbinger of gore that readers had been left to imagine for themselves. When the final battle unfolds, Greyback is no longer simply a name to dread. He is an unavoidable predator darting through the rubble, seizing his victims. In the most memorable example, the camera lingers on Lavender Brown's limp body as Greyback hunches over her, his mouth slick with blood. Though the film ultimately spares her a confirmed death, the implication is ghastly. Even the audience conditioned to the saga's darker moments can feel a wave of revulsion. It is this explicit embodiment of Greyback's savagery that cements him as more dangerous, more monstrous than the character Rowling restrained behind the veil of narrative suggestion. His visual transformation is worth examining in detail because it underscores how the medium of film can magnify an antagonist's menace. In the books, Greyback's horror relied on the imagination. Readers were forced to picture the wet tearing of flesh, the screams of children, the moonlit hunts. In contrast, cinema wields makeup, lighting, and choreography to strip away the protective scrim of imagination and force the audience to see exactly what they would rather only fear in theory. The films even adjusted Greyback's appearance so that in human form he already seemed part wolf. His nose was flattened into a blunt snout, his beard tangled into a mane, and his fingers curled like claws. This design ensured that the viewer never forgot his duality. He was the fusion of man and beast, without the neat compartmentalization of human reason and animal instinct. In the books, his human face is never described in such detail, allowing readers to superimpose any degree of monstrosity they could stomach. Consider his role during the battle at the Astronomy Tower in Half-Blood Prince. In the novel, he is part of the Death Eater contingent that forces its way into Hogwarts, but again, he remains mostly a sinister backdrop. He does not maul students as he prowls the corridors. Instead, his presence is communicated through the dread he inspires, and he ultimately disappears into the confusion after Dumbledore's death. The film version of this attack is more savage. Greyback charges into the fray alongside Bellatrix Lestrange, flinging curses and physically attacking the defenders. It is not enough for him to stand behind the ranks of Death Eaters. He must lunge forward, teeth bared, arms swinging in a grotesque pantomime of a wolf's lunge. Even when retreating, he pauses to howl his triumph, a gesture that seals the impression that this creature is not simply a man in allegiance with Voldemort, but a ravenous predator whose allegiance to violence is greater than any ideology. This escalation of violence reaches its peak in the final battle, where Greyback becomes an unstoppable presence that no character can fully anticipate or repel. During the chaos, he attacks Lavender Brown. In the books, her fate is ambiguous. She is described as feebly stirring after Hermione blasts Greyback away, but the films intensify the horror by making the attack graphically clear. The moment is brief but searing, a tableau of feral hunger and helpless prey. Here, the transformation from psychological menace to physical threat is absolute. The filmmakers understood that the subtlest horrors in prose often need embodiment on screen to maintain their impact. By forcing the audience to watch Greyback's predation rather than imagine it, they elevated his menace into something unforgettable. This divergence between mediums reveals something profound about narrative tension. Rowling's method relied on suggestion, allowing readers to dread what might happen, rather than describing every grisly detail. Greyback's true savagery could only be inferred from scars and whispers. The reader's imagination did the work of amplifying the terror. But in a visual medium, the threat must be shown. It must have shape and motion, or else it dissolves into mere reputation. Greyback's expanded physical presence ensures he never becomes background noise. He emerges repeatedly in crowd scenes, snarling and lunging, an ever-present reminder that no corner of Hogwarts is safe. While Voldemort remains the calculating embodiment of evil, Greyback is the embodiment of visceral horror, the raw, unreasoning appetite that stalks the edges of every war. Number 15, Grindelwald, cameo in the finale. In the dim, echoing shadows of Nurmengard, the final prison of Gellert Grindelwald's long and terrible reign, the book paints an image of a broken relic of the past. The Harry Potter novels describe him as thin, white-haired, and stripped of all the illusions of grandeur that had once made him the most dangerous dark wizard in the world. When Voldemort came seeking the Elder Wand, Grindelwald in the books showed no grandeur left. Only a tired defiance. But in the films, something astonishing happened. The actor who embodied Grindelwald gave this frail old figure a spark of defiant charisma, as though even decades in a cell could not fully extinguish the dark flame within. The movie lifted him from the tatters of defeat and lent him a tragic majesty that the pages had only hinted at in a few spare lines. When Harry first learns of Grindelwald in the Deathly Hallows, it is through scraps of memory and fragments of Dumbledore's past. The books describe him primarily as the teenage revolutionary who sought to make wizards supreme over muggles. Yet the film's single, electrifying scene compresses a lifetime of tyranny, friendship, ambition, and downfall into a moment when Voldemort appears in the prison cell. In the Kati novel, Voldemort finds an old man who is not afraid to die, and who even tries to protect Dumbledore's grave from desecration. This quiet bravery is affecting, but almost small in scale. The film infuses the moment with an undercurrent of something more dangerous. Grindelwald's spirit remains unbowed. There is a moment in the movie when Voldemort stands over the cot where Grindelwald lies. Light flickers over the contours of the old man's face, and though his body is frail, there is no trembling in his gaze. The camera does not shy away from the sight of those pale eyes locked on the red gleam of Voldemort's. In that instant, Grindelwald does not look like a vanquished enemy. He looks like an equal who has made peace with the darkness he once courted and dares the new Dark Lord to recognize him as a rival rather than a victim. This detail, absent from the book, electrifies the character. In the text, J.K. Rowling describes him simply, a frail figure stirred on the bed, his face skull-like with a fringe of white hair. He is not given more than a few sentences of direct presence. The impression is of a remnant, a ghost of history barely hanging on. When he tells Voldemort that the wand was never in his possession, it is described without much ceremony. "Kill me then," he says, and Voldemort does. The entire exchange reads almost like an afterthought, a necessary footnote to explain the Elder Wand's journey. But the filmmakers understood that Grindelwald deserved a final moment worthy of his legend. The cinematic Grindelwald in Deathly Hallows, Part 1, is infused with a quiet strength that startles audiences familiar with the text. His posture remains regal even in rags. His voice, though softened by age, retains a ring of command. This portrayal suggests that while his body is imprisoned, some core part of his will remains free. That is why the moment feels larger than life. Voldemort does not simply extinguish a dying spark. He must confront a flame that will not go out willingly. In the film, Grindelwald becomes the last standing piece of the old world Voldemort pretends he has replaced. Visually, the filmmakers framed Grindelwald's face in close-up, so the viewer could see every flicker of contempt and defiance. It was a bold choice. In the book, you can breeze past the passage in seconds. In the film, you are forced to meet his eyes and witness the lingering pride that refuses to be erased. The effect is almost unsettling, like staring into the last embers of a once terrible fire and seeing them glow brighter for the wind that tries to smother them. What is most striking about the film's version is the way Grindelwald's dignity becomes inseparable from his menace. The books show him only as defeated, but the movie suggests he retains some of the magnetism that once drew Dumbledore to him. For an audience that knows the past they shared, it becomes impossible to see Grindelwald purely as a frail old man. The moment he lifts his chin to face Voldemort, you remember he was once the greatest threat to the wizarding world. That memory is alive in the room, thick as the shadows on the walls. In this interpretation, Grindelwald's defiance seems almost like a final victory. Voldemort, who has always demanded absolute submission, cannot break the old wizard's will. The film subtly implies that Grindelwald's contempt cuts deeper than any curse. By telling Voldemort that the wand lies with Dumbledore's corpse, Grindelwald issues a challenge: desecrate the tomb of the only wizard you fear if you dare. The actor's eyes are clear, his expression unwavering, and the message resonates. Voldemort must degrade himself to pursue a power that was never truly his. There is an unspoken question behind Grindelwald's stare. Who, in the end, is the greater monster? The man who conquered half of Europe but still loved, or the one who cannot comprehend love at all? In the book, this question flickers briefly before the narrative moves on. The film forces the audience to feel it. Grindelwald, who once sought dominion over Muggles for the greater good, is no less culpable for his crimes, but he becomes more complex, almost tragic. He is a relic of an older, more ideological darkness, and the film captures that perfectly. Even in defeat, the cinematic Grindelwald seems to possess an authority Voldemort can never quite steal. Perhaps that is why the moment is so magnetic. It is the only time in the entire film series when Voldemort looks vaguely unsure. He cannot intimidate the old man, he cannot corrupt or seduce him, all he can do is kill him, and even then he cannot erase Grindelwald's memory. That final expression of unbowed disdain is more lasting than any spell. Number 16, Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley in the pages of J.K. Rowling's books was always the comforting presence at the Burrow, the warm embrace of a hand-knitted jumper, and the fierce matriarch whose primary weapons were love and discipline. She was the mother who fussed over Harry's meals, and the woman who stood her ground when Rita Skeeter published lies. But for the greater part of the novels, she was never depicted as a duelist or a witch of considerable combative power. She worried about Fred and George's pranks, nagged Ron about his homework, and scolded Percy for his pompous behavior. Her strength was in her hearth and her heart. Yet in the films, especially in the climactic moment of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, Molly underwent a transformation that almost eclipsed her literary counterpart. She became not just the embodiment of maternal ferocity, but a force of magic in her own right, a towering figure who could stand eye to eye with Bellatrix Lestrange and not flinch. The book's depiction of Molly's duel is striking but brief, almost deliberately understated. In Chapter 36, The Flaw in the Plan, Rowling describes Bellatrix cackling with unhinged glee as she lunges at Ginny, hurling deadly curses. The narration tells us that Molly's scream of rage cuts across the chaos, that she forces her daughter aside and begins to duel Bellatrix with fury such as none of them had ever seen on Molly's face. Within a paragraph, Bellatrix is dead, struck squarely in the chest by Molly's curse. It is shocking and satisfying, but occupies no more than a few lines. It is clear that Molly is capable, but the book leaves the specifics to the imagination. The violence of her grief and her protectiveness becomes her strength, but her abilities as a combat witch remain largely implied rather than shown in elaborate detail. In contrast, the film elevates this moment into a spectacle worthy of any cinematic duel. The atmosphere vibrates with tension as Helena Bonham Carter's Bellatrix launches streams of green and purple light toward Ginny, cackling in vicious delight. Molly steps into frame, her wand raised, her face set in a grimace of deadly resolve. It is not merely a mother protecting her child. It is the revelation that Molly Weasley, the woman who had until now fussed over packed lunches and Christmas presents, contains within her a power as ancient and terrifying as any dark witch's. The visual language of the duel, swirling fire, sizzling wards, the crack of magic against magic, tells the audience that Molly is no passive bystander. She is every bit Bellatrix's equal, if not her superior. This depiction shifts Molly's character from a domestic figure into a mythic archetype, the avenging mother whose love becomes a weapon. It is one thing to read that Bellatrix's gloating smile froze, her eyes seemed to bulge, and to understand intellectually that Molly has struck her down. It is another entirely to witness Julie Walters, her voice quivering with fury, hurling spell after spell with flawless precision, each incantation more powerful than the last. The camera frames her not as a minor character but as a hero at the climax of her own story, her face bathed in the flickering glow of her unleashed magic. The filmmakers made deliberate choices to amplify this transformation. In the novel, the duel is a sudden eruption, a necessary punctuation mark in the broader battle. In the movie, it becomes an emotional crescendo. The script allows Molly to stand alone, all eyes upon her as she squares her shoulders and tells Bellatrix with cold finality that she will not touch her daughter. The line, "Not my daughter, you bitch," rings out like a battle cry. In that moment, the entire audience feels the power of a woman who has spent her life loving, sacrificing, and worrying. Her strength, long hidden beneath gentle scolding and knitted sweaters, surges into view in the form of lethal spells. Even the choreography of the duel communicates Molly's unspoken depth. She does not merely block Bellatrix's curses, she advances, step by step, her wand a conduit for her determination. Sparks burst in the darkness, shards of glass rain around them, and the air itself seems to recoil from the ferocity of their confrontation. Unlike the novel, where her triumph is almost instantaneous, the film makes her victory hard-won. The duel is not a footnote, but a centerpiece. By allowing the struggle to play out, the filmmakers show Molly drawing on reserves of magical skill and willpower that the books only hint at. This decision was not without risk. Some purists objected to the embellishment, arguing that it overshadowed other characters' contributions to the final battle. Yet in context, the choice resonates. It is a moment of catharsis not only for Molly but for the audience, who have watched her labor in the shadows of more flamboyant heroes. It is the fulfillment of a promise embedded in her character all along, that love, when threatened, can become as fierce as any ambition or cruelty. The filmmakers recognized this and made it the emotional core of her transformation. In examining the differences between the two portrayals, it is impossible to ignore how the film harnesses the visual language of magic to communicate Molly's evolution. Every flick of her wand sends arcs of light surging toward Bellatrix's shields. Every step she takes radiates intent. The book requires the reader to imagine the extent of her skill, but the film demands that we witness it in detail. Julie Walters' performance carries an almost operatic gravity, reminding us that behind Molly's warmth lies a witch forged by war and motherhood alike. Consider the moment Bellatrix taunts Ginny, sneering with a sadistic gleam in her eye. In the novel, Molly's intervention is a single paragraph of description, swift and lethal. In the film, the pause before Molly speaks is weighted with decades of sacrifice and devotion. Her glare seems to say that this final transgression, this threat against her child, has crossed a line that will not be uncrossed. The audience is primed to expect a duel, but nothing prepares them for the raw intensity that follows. The contrast underscores how much more formidable Molly becomes in this adaptation. Specific examples in the film further illustrate this power. When Bellatrix launches a curse that shatters a column, Molly counters with a wave of her wand that hurls Bellatrix backward, sending up a spray of broken stone. Another curse ricochets off Molly's shimmering barrier, dissolving harmlessly into the smoke. She does not flinch or stumble. She advances. Each gesture is precise, measured, and unstoppable. The moment Bellatrix falters just before she dies is not due to carelessness, but because Molly has simply overpowered her. It is a triumph of both skill and ferocity. This portrayal contrasts sharply with the book's subtler depiction of Molly's strengths. There, she is more often worried about the twins' shop than about demonstrating magical prowess. She spends much of the series organizing, comforting, and cleaning, her wand work directed toward domestic spells rather than combat. The duel is an exception, a sudden eruption of her hidden abilities. But the brevity of the scene leaves open the question of whether she is simply lucky or truly powerful. The film erases any ambiguity. Molly is not merely competent, she is deadly. Quotes from the book underscore how sudden and decisive her victory was. Rowling writes, Molly's curse soared beneath Bellatrix's outstretched arm and hit her squarely in the chest, directly over her heart. The language is clinical, almost dispassionate, emphasizing the speed of the kill. There is no lengthy exchange, no protracted struggle. The film's choice to expand this into a prolonged duel adds texture and stakes that the book's economy of words does not. It elevates Molly from a mother defending her child to a warrior who triumphs over Voldemort's most loyal lieutenant. This choice affects how audiences remember Molly. In the books, she is an endearing figure, the heart of the Weasley family, always ready with a cup of tea and a worried frown. In the film, she becomes something else, the embodiment of protective fury. Viewers leave the theatre not only moved by her love, but awed by her capability. It is an interpretation that reshapes her legacy, ensuring that she is counted among the heroes of the final battle, rather than a footnote to Harry's victory. Narratively, this expanded duel fulfills the storytelling rule that a character's arc should climax in action reflecting their deepest values. For Molly, those values are family, loyalty, and the conviction that no one, no matter how powerful, will harm her children while she draws breath. The film seizes on this and makes it unforgettable. Her final spell does not merely end Bellatrix's life, it asserts that love can wield as much force as hate. In this, the film version of Molly Weasley transcends her written origins. This is why so many viewers came away with the impression that Molly was stronger in the films, not because she changed as a character, but because the visual medium allowed her most hidden qualities to burst into the open. The same woman who had packed sandwiches and knitted sweaters was revealed to be an apex predator when her young were threatened. It was a revelation that felt both surprising and inevitable, a testament to how adaptations can deepen our understanding of familiar characters. This interpretation does not diminish the power of the book's version, rather it highlights the different ways stories can be told. In print, Molly's victory is a quiet thunderclap, an implicit reminder that the quietest hearts sometimes strike the hardest. On screen, it becomes a storm that demands to be witnessed. Neither is less true, but the film's approach undeniably leaves a more vivid imprint, one that lingers long after the credits roll. In the end, whether you prefer the book's swift justice or the film's extended duel, there is no denying that Molly Weasley's moment in the spotlight was a triumph of character development. The woman who had so often been relegated to the sidelines stepped forward and claimed her place among the legends of the wizarding world. The filmmakers did not invent her strength, they simply gave it the room to shine. Number 17. Death Eaters in general. In the quiet corridors of the books, the Death Eaters crept more as shadows than as soldiers, their menace woven into whispered warnings and the trembling of those who dared to speak Voldemort's name aloud. They were dreadful because of what people said they had done, murders, tortures, unspeakable curses. But when the time came to meet them face to face, many of their battles unfolded in swift paragraphs, more implied than revealed. Yet the films dared to translate the hushed fear into something tangible. and in doing so, the collective figure of the Death Eaters became an army more terrifying than their literary ancestors. The spectacle of their assaults burned itself into the imagination of viewers who would no longer see them as a mere congregation of hooded bigots, but as a disciplined, almost supernatural fighting force that moved with precision and merciless intent. One of the clearest examples comes from the invasion of the Ministry of Magic. In the book Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the Death Eaters ambush Harry and his friends in the Department of Mysteries, where the skirmish is tense, but, in Rowling's narration, almost restrained in its descriptions. They throw curses and hexes, but the focus stays on the teenagers' fear, the glass spheres, the confusion of corridors. The text remarks, "A jet of red light flew from Bellatrix's wand and Harry ducked, leaving most of the violence." To the reader's imagination, the scene is harrowing, but it reads as a desperate escape rather than a showcase of overwhelming force. In contrast, the film adaptation explodes with a blinding ballet of dark magic. The Death Eaters materialize in swirling black smoke, forming and unforming like demons breaking through the veil. They hurl spells that crash into the walls like cannon fire, their wands snapping forward with a deadly unity that instantly makes the young heroes look outmatched. This visual reinterpretation transforms the Death Eaters into a coherent military entity. The coordinated movements, the ritualistic way they emerge from darkness, the smoky trails that announce their arrival, none of this was explicit in the books. There they were terrifying because of their cruelty, not their choreography. The film's choice to bind them together in visual symbolism created a collective power that feels more relentless, as though Voldemort has not merely recruited them, but fused them into a single monstrous organism. During the attack on Bill and Fleur's wedding, the book only reports that there was a bang and the Marquis was thrown into darkness. In those lines, the attack feels sudden and disorienting, which was effective in prose but left the actual strength of the Death Eaters somewhat abstract. The film, however, enlarges the chaos. The black shapes rush in like a hurricane, shattering the tent with detonations of dark energy. People scream and vanish, tables are hurled into the air, and the intruders radiate an almost elemental ferocity. In the film's language, this is no band of hooded criminals, but an elite shock troop capable of overwhelming any gathering in seconds. Bellatrix Lestrange, though already a formidable presence in the novels, becomes in the films almost the living embodiment of the Death Eaters' enhanced power. She is not merely the shrieking fanatic who cackles after killing Sirius. She moves with the confidence of a general. In the book, her duel with Molly Weasley is fierce, but written in a few paragraphs that emphasize Molly's protective fury. The film seizes the opportunity to show Bellatrix's skill, unleashing volleys of spells so powerful they crack the walls around her. When she advances, she radiates triumph, as though certain no witch could ever match her strength. This visual reimagining makes Bellatrix an icon of dark magic, and her presence magnifies the entire group's aura of invincibility. Another striking detail of the films is the way the Death Eaters employ their magic, with almost effortless artistry. In the books, duels often begin with shouted incantations, sometimes ending quickly if a spell lands, but in the films the Death Eaters wield their curses in long, wordless arcs of destructive force, beams of light that cut through the darkness like spears. When they assault Hogwarts in The Half-Blood Prince, the coordinated fusillade of curses raining down from the astronomy tower creates the sense that Voldemort has trained them as an army rather than a collection of fanatics. The book, by contrast, emphasizes Snape's betrayal and Dumbledore's fall, leaving the Death Eaters themselves almost faceless in the background. When the Death Eaters storm the Hogwarts Express searching for Harry, the film magnifies the peril by showing them swooping through the countryside in that signature tornado of smoke. In the novels, the search is implied and reported by Lupin as something that happened elsewhere, emphasizing Voldemort's expanding influence more than the Death Eaters' personal might. But the film makes it visceral. They are predators sweeping over the land itself, able to appear wherever they wish in clouds of darkness. This repeated imagery underscores that they are no longer simply followers in robes, but beings transformed by their allegiance to Voldemort's vision of conquest. Rowling's text always suggests the Death Eaters' power in their willingness to torture and kill. For instance, in The Goblet of Fire, Karkaroff's memory testifies they were his most faithful servants. But that line, while chilling, describes loyalty rather than battlefield supremacy. The films extend that loyalty into prowess, showing them in ranks, wands raised as if rehearsed for war. The sense of cohesion was never fully present on the page, where they often appear as an unruly collection of brutes and aristocrats bound more by ideology than discipline. Consider also the escape from Malfoy Manor. In the novel, the Death Eaters are again portrayed more as a menace offstage, bickering and waiting for Voldemort while the prisoners plot their escape. The real terror is the possibility of Voldemort's arrival, not the Death Eaters' abilities themselves. In the film, this sequence becomes a siege of desperation, with Bellatrix shrieking curses and the walls exploding under magical assault. The Death Eaters do not wait passively, they pursue with relentless energy, reinforcing their cinematic transformation into a nearly unstoppable force. Lucius Malfoy himself illustrates the gap between the two versions. In the books, Lucius's arrogance and eventual disgrace dominate his character arc, making him appear more cowardly than deadly. But in the films, even as he falls out of favor, he remains an imposing figure in combat. The wand in his hand never seems ornamental. It feels like a blade he would gladly plunge into any enemy. This nuance elevates the entire group, suggesting that even those Death Eaters who have lost Voldemort's trust retain an edge the books only hint at. In the climactic Battle of Hogwarts, the films expand the Death Eaters' role into an almost mythic army, converging on the castle in a mass of black vapor. Their arrival feels like the storm at the end of the world. In the book, their attack is described in terms of numbers and chaos, but individual duels often happen quickly or are recounted after the fact. The film lingers on each assault, showing Death Eaters battering the protective shield, breaking through with coordinated curses and flooding the grounds in a tide of darkness. This visual embodiment of their threat captures something the books only whispered, the sense that Voldemort's followers could reduce the wizarding world to ash if not opposed by every ounce of courage the defenders could summon. It is worth noting that in the books, the Death Eaters' primary weapon is fear itself, as seen in the moment when the dark mark appears above the Quidditch World Cup. The text observes, "Even the Muggles saw it, you know whose sign." That fear was powerful, but it remained intangible. The films, by contrast, insist on making their power visible. Their battles explode in fire and light, their movements rehearsed, their attacks synchronized like a military campaign. They no longer need to rely only on their reputation. The spectacle itself becomes a tool of intimidation. In many ways, this artistic decision reshapes how viewers understand the Wizarding War. The novels often underline the idea that Voldemort's return is as much about the decay of trust as about open conflict. The Death Eaters in print are a symptom of a deeper malaise. The films, however, choose to embody that malaise in formidable warriors whose abilities mirror Voldemort's grandiose ambitions. This shift not only heightens the sense of danger but also allows the final confrontations to feel as cataclysmic as the stakes suggest. Even the Dementors, who are sometimes deployed alongside Death Eaters, feel more integrated with their terror in the films. When the black clouds of Death Eaters swirl through the air, it becomes harder to distinguish them from Dementors at a glance. The visual language merges them into a single darkness, making it seem as if the Death Eaters have transcended mortality itself to become living shadows. This is never implied in the books, where Dementors and Death Eaters remain distinct forces. The film's transformation of the Death Eaters from feared criminals to disciplined battalions resonates most in their treatment of the ordinary members. In the novels, characters like Travers and Yaxley are referenced mainly for bureaucratic treachery and occasional dueling. In the films, every Death Eater seems equally adept, their wands unleashing waves of devastation. This decision creates a more even sense of threat, making every clash a test of survival rather than a chance to confront a single named villain. This cinematic choice elevates not only Voldemort's menace but the urgency of the hero's struggle. By making the Death Eaters visually and tactically overwhelming, the films underscore that resistance requires not just bravery, but unity and sacrifice. They cease to be a gang of thugs in borrowed masks and become the dark mirror of the Order of the Phoenix, a disciplined, almost professional force bound to a cause as passionately as their enemies. In the end, this difference is why the film Death Eaters feel stronger, more fearsome, and more unforgettable than their book counterparts. The novels left their power mostly to imagination. The films put it on the screen with a thunderous clarity that no reader could ever again dismiss as merely reputation. Number 18. Peter Pettigrew. Peter Pettigrew's reputation in the Harry Potter books is defined by his cowardice, his betrayal, and his general magical mediocrity. The text consistently depicts him as someone who survives not through power or skill, but through sycophancy and fear. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when confronted in the Shrieking Shack, he collapses almost instantly. Pettigrew burst into tears. It was horrible to watch, like an oversized, balding baby cowering on the floor. This image is so complete that one almost forgets he was once a marauder, equal in schooling to James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin. Yet the movies, especially Alfonso Cuarón's Prisoner of Azkaban, sharpened the edges of Pettigrew's character and allowed the audience to see a rat with sharper claws. The Shrieking Shack scene in the film is a key example of this difference. In the book, the moment Sirius Black and Remus Lupin reveal Pettigrew's identity is dominated by moral horror. There is little sense that Peter is actually dangerous in that moment. He is pathetic. But in the film, Timothy Spall plays him with a twitchy animal menace. He writhes, hisses, and even snarls as his wand is forced back into his hand. The camera doesn't just show fear, it suggests calculation, as though even cornered he is running through escape plans. This difference turns the showdown into a genuine threat. The book makes clear that once he is unmasked, he has no more tricks. He was squealing like a piglet. Harry, Ron, and Hermione can restrain him easily. Sirius wants to kill him not because he's dangerous in a duel, but because of moral outrage. In the movie, though, even tied up, Peter is fidgety, looking for an opening. His eyes flicker, and there's an implication that if his captors let down their guard even a little, he might kill. This is subtle, but it creates genuine suspense. The transformation from rat to human is also more frightening in the movie. In the book, it's described in a fairly clinical way. There was a loud pop and Pettigrew appeared, but in the film it's a grotesque metamorphosis with bones cracking and fur receding slowly. The direction suggests the animalgus form isn't just a disguise but part of his predatory cunning. It makes the audience feel he could revert at any moment, biting or escaping. This animalistic threat is largely absent from the books, where his rat form is mostly a tool for cowardly evasion. In terms of raw magical competence, the book repeatedly portrays Pettigrew as weaker. During the events of the Goblet of Fire, he performs the ritual to resurrect Voldemort, but he's mainly a servant. Even there, Voldemort calls him Wormtail with open disdain and treats him like a disposable asset. In the movie version, however, there's a sense that Pettigrew is a competent dark wizard in his own right. The ritual scene is dark, lit by fire, and filmed in a way that makes his incantations and knife work appear deliberate and precise. He seems more like a loyal, skilled acolyte than a frightened tool. When Harry is captured at Malfoy Manor in Deathly Hallows, the book shows Pettigrew hesitating fatally when Harry reminds him of his life debt. The silver fingers slackened. He is killed by his own hand. It's poetic justice, but reinforces his essential weakness. He can't even control the magical prosthesis Voldemort gave him. In the movie adaptation of this part, which is condensed and changed significantly, he is not shown in detail at all, perhaps to preserve the more menacing image created in earlier films. They never bother showing him killed by the hand, possibly because that would undercut the menace they'd built. Even Pettigrew's rat form is more dangerous in the movies. In the book, Scabbers is described as shabby, sleepy, and barely mobile. He was losing patches of fur and seemed to have developed a permanent tremor in his whiskers. Crookshanks is the only one who senses anything is off. In the film, however, Scabbers is quick, slippery, and sly-eyed. He dodges Crookshanks in sudden bursts of speed. He's played like a streetwise survivor, adding to the sense that Pettigrew is no fool. This choice matters because it changes how we see Ron's betrayal by Scabbers. In the books, it's almost comical how Ron is attached to such a useless pet. It underscores Pettigrew's cowardice. He hides in plain sight, relying on being unthreatening. But the movie rat is sinister enough to make the reveal genuinely creepy. Viewers see Ron cradling a creature that is visibly scheming, lending the whole subplot a darker edge. In the Shrieking Shack duel, the movie also shows Pettigrew grabbing his wand with more purpose. Though outnumbered, he doesn't just fold immediately. The blocking of the scene gives him space to move and resist before being restrained. Even while begging for his life, there's an oily confidence in Spall's performance. It's a reminder that he's survived with this coward strategy for years, and that survival has an ugly, adaptive intelligence. The cinematography of that scene emphasizes close-ups of his twitching face, his darting eyes, and his dirty fingernails. These details make Pettigrew revolting but also unsettlingly alive. In the book, you feel sorry for him despite his crimes. In the movie, the audience recoils, but they also sense he might bite if given the chance. That is a crucial change. The film refuses to let him be pathetic in the same way. Alfonso Cuarón's direction deserves credit for this reimagining. He creates an atmosphere in which even minor characters have teeth. The Shrieking Shack is dark, cramped, and chaotic, forcing Pettigrew's fear and cunning to the surface. There is a sense that he could lash out magically or physically at any moment. The movie makes Sirius and Lupin's fury seem justified not just morally but tactically. They can't afford to let him live because he's genuinely dangerous. Compare that to the book's moral argument. Lupin and Sirius want to kill him because he betrayed their friends, not because he's any kind of threat. Lupin says, "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't betrayed us, Harry would have no need to know." This confession shows Lupin's heartbreak and moral outrage, but it also shows they don't see Pettigrew as dangerous in himself. The film alters that by suggesting they also fear what he might do if he escapes. Even the set design heightens his menace. The film's shack is falling apart, with broken floorboards and slanting walls. Pettigrew scrambles around like an actual rat, using the environment to avoid capture longer. It's a small change, but it matters. Instead of cringing in one place and sobbing, he's mobile, squirming, forcing the others to corral him like vermin. It turns what is mostly a moral confrontation in the book into an actual hunt. This change has ripple effects for the perception of the Marauders as well. In the book, the Marauders' tragedy is that they trusted a coward. In the movie, it feels more like they were infiltrated by a cunning mole. That alteration makes their anger more understandable to viewers who might otherwise wonder why they don't just tie him up and send him to Azkaban immediately. The tension in the scene is elevated because the threat is real. Even when Pettigrew is captured, the film resists, making him too pathetic. He whines and pleads, but Spall's delivery keeps a raspy, animal edge. It's as though he's testing which of them might waver, might let him go. He is always negotiating for his survival, and it's unsettling. The viewer realizes that in a different situation, he might have talked his way out or even killed one of them. The books rely on dialogue to convey his weakness. He offers his life to Harry, says, "Remus, Sirius, my old friends," and basically collapses as soon as he's disarmed. There is no suspense about him escaping once he's unmasked. The film, on the other hand, shows Sirius nearly executing him then and there because of the potential threat he poses. The moral choice Harry makes to spare. Pettigrew's life feels heavier because the viewer senses he might regret it later. Another key difference is how the film suggests Pettigrew's loyalty to Voldemort is rooted in something more like ideological zeal or even fanatical fear. The way he whispers "Master" carries a grotesque reverence. The book shows this as mostly opportunism, pure survival instinct. While the film retains that, it also suggests that Voldemort has given him purpose, something that makes him more frightening. An opportunist can be reasoned with, a fanatic cannot. Ultimately, the change in his portrayal serves the movies well. The narrative needs more urgency, and Pettigrew's elevated threat level provides it. Scenes where he scuttles around or brandishes a wand add stakes. His betrayal feels less like the act of a pitiful worm and more like the treachery of someone who is willing to kill. Even if he is not a master duelist, the movie makes you believe he would use the killing curse if given the chance. In this way, the movies arguably redeem Pettigrew as a villain, not morally, but narratively. Instead of being a punchline to Sirius's tragedy, he becomes a real antagonist, however low and vile. Viewers don't forget him after the shrieking shack. He stays in the mind as a reminder that Voldemort's followers aren't all obvious monsters. Some hide in plain sight, sharp and dangerous, waiting for their moment. That is something the books, in all their brilliance, treated with less visual menace. Number 19. Bill Weasley. Bill Weasley's presence in the Harry Potter books always felt more like a promise than a reality. From the moment Ron described his eldest brother as the daring curse-breaker for Gringotts with long hair tied back and a fang earring, the reader imagined an unflappable hero who wrestled with ancient tombs and dueled dark wizards across deserts. Yet in J.K. Rowling's text, Bill remained mostly in the background, a steady but distant force. Even when he was savaged by Fenrir Greyback during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, the narration swiftly moved on. He recovered with a new taste for rare meat and some faint scars. Fleur's declaration, "I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think," was perhaps his most memorable moment, overshadowing any prolonged demonstration of his skill or strength. But the films, in their sparing moments, gave Bill a kind of quiet valor that finally matched the legend whispered in Gryffindor dormitories. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Bill emerges not simply as a name in passing, but as a participant whose steadiness anchors the turmoil of the Order's efforts. The film expands the scene in which Harry is moved from Privet Drive to the Burrow, transforming it into a more cinematic operation where Bill's composure contrasts the chaos. He helps guide Harry safely to his family's home, and even though the screen time is brief, his practical courage stands out. In the book, the narrative swiftly catalogues who transported whom, leaving Bill in the crowd of protectors. The movie makes the stakes clearer. Bill is no longer just a sibling, but a frontline operative, fully aware that Voldemort could appear at any second. Bill's relationship with Fleur Delacour gains new shading in the films as well. The book introduces Fleur as somewhat shallow and vain, her engagement to Bill met with skepticism by Molly and Ginny. But in Deathly Hallows Part 1, the film shows Fleur standing beside Bill as they host the wedding, her affection plain and mutual, with no lingering resentment over his injuries. In this cinematic version, Bill's scars are not a source of tension, but a testament to the life he has risked, and Fleur's steadfast support amplifies his stature as a man who has survived the worst and kept his dignity intact. Their quiet understanding at the kitchen table after the wedding attack is an understated moment that conveys more about Bill's resilience than any description of his earring or dragonhide boots. Perhaps one of the most vivid examples of Bill's elevation in the films comes during the defense of the Burrow. The movie invented a scene where Death Eaters attack the Weasley home in flames, a moment not present in the books. Here, Bill fights beside Arthur and the twins, his face lit by burning rafters, wand raised in a practiced grip. While the book largely spares the Burrow until the final battles, the film uses this episode to demonstrate how Bill's professional experience as a curse-breaker translates seamlessly into home defense. The image of Bill standing in front of his family, unflinching despite the inferno, becomes an emblem of how the movies gave him space to be more than a brother in the background. In contrast, the books often prioritized Percy's estrangement, Fred and George's mischief, and Ron's insecurities, leaving Bill's character mostly static after his engagement. The text offers details about his professional success and handsomeness, but rarely shows him acting with urgency. Even in Half-Blood Prince, when Bill is attacked by Greyback, the scene is told largely through Molly's distress and Fleur's defiance. The moment is powerful for its emotional impact, but does not focus on Bill's own reaction or endurance. The films, though still concise, gave Bill more agency. Instead of being spoken about, he appears in action, making tactical decisions and bearing scars as proof of his sacrifice. Bill's maturity in the films also contrasts with the youthful recklessness sometimes implied in the books. While Charlie is often portrayed as the adventurer among the Weasley siblings, Bill becomes the unshakable protector on screen. The small gestures, handing Fleur her cloak before the wedding, clasping Harry's shoulder in the safe house, accumulate into a picture of a man who has seen enough dark magic to understand what it costs. He never behaves like a braggart. Instead, he embodies the Order's ethos, that bravery is often quiet and measured, less about the flourish of a duel than the willingness to stand between evil and the people you love. This shift is especially evident in the movie's approach to Bill's role as host and guide. When the trio arrives at Shell Cottage after Dobby's death, Bill receives them not as a panicked relative, but as a reliable safe haven. He shows no hesitation in offering sanctuary. The books mention this refuge almost in passing, with Bill described as concerned but peripheral. The films grant him a sense of responsibility that feels earned. Shell Cottage becomes a small outpost of resistance, and Bill, as its steward, finally occupies the center of the frame. It is here that his professional life as a curse-breaker and his commitment to the Order merge, defining him not only as a supportive older brother, but as a leader in his own right. Even aesthetically, the films make Bill's experience more tangible. His scars are visible, etched reminders of the cost of fighting Voldemort. The visual medium gives weight to his injuries in a way the text could not fully achieve. When he stands beside Fleur, the difference in his appearance is a quiet acknowledgement that no one leaves this war unchanged. In the book, the details of his healing are concise. He recovers, he resumes work, and his fondness for raw steak becomes a passing curiosity. The films keep his scars in the audience's eye, refusing to let viewers forget the violence that marked him. Some critics have argued that the movies still underused Bill compared to what he could have been, especially given the charisma Domhnall Gleeson brought to the role. But within the limits of screen time, the filmmakers managed to convey more of his strength and integrity than the novels sometimes allowed. Where the text relies on Ron's stories, how cool Bill is, how he once gave Harry sound advice, the movies let Bill demonstrate these qualities firsthand. Even the simple act of carrying a fallen comrade or placing a protective ward around the burrow becomes a testament to his resolve. One small but telling detail occurs during the preparation for the Seven Potters operation. Bill's expression when Mad-Eye Moody briefs the Order is neither fearful nor arrogant. He listens, nods once, and takes his assigned task without complaint. In the book, this logistical planning is covered briskly, names listed almost like a roll call. The film slows the moment down just enough to show Bill as a man who has survived Egypt's tomb curses and Gringotts vaults, and now faces an enemy more dangerous than any he has known. His readiness feels authentic, informed by the same discipline that made him Gringotts' most trusted curse-breaker. The dynamic with Fleur also benefits from the film's subtler approach. After Bill is injured, there is no protracted discussion about whether Fleur's love is real. Instead, her devotion is assumed, and Bill's acceptance of her care is quiet, without any protest or self-pity. This understated solidarity highlights Bill's strength of character far more effectively than dialogue alone could. In the books, Fleur's fierce declaration in the hospital wing is memorable, but Bill's own feelings are left unspoken. The films fill that gap by showing, rather than telling, the depth of their bond. By the time the viewer reaches Shell Cottage, Bill has grown into a figure of calm authority. When Harry and his friends arrive, battered and grief-stricken, Bill does not question their purpose. He simply offers shelter. This instinct to protect, to treat their fight as his own, feels like the culmination of everything the books hinted at, but never fully portrayed. In the novels, Bill's commitment to the Order and to his family is clear, but always described through another's perspective. The films finally allow him to inhabit his own story. The differences between page and screen are not merely cosmetic. They reflect how adaptation can sometimes crystallize what an author only alludes to. Bill Weasley was always meant to be brave, competent, and unshakably loyal. The movies, limited though they were in runtime, made this visible. The moment he steps out to meet the arriving Death Eaters at the Burrow is brief, but in that flicker of film, he becomes the champion his younger brothers always admired. His portrayal is a reminder that in war, not every hero is loud or central to the legend. Some, like Bill, operate in the margins, their strength revealed in the way they hold the line. The books gave him the title of Cursebreaker and a backstory of adventure. The films showed what it looks like when such a man is finally called to defend what he loves. Number 20, Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley Shacklebolt was always a figure of understated gravity in the pages of J.K. Rowling's books, a man whose reputation preceded him more often than his actions unfolded in view of the reader. He entered the story as a senior Auror trusted by Dumbledore and the Order, his authority recognized but rarely dramatized. In Order of the Phoenix, he worked within the Ministry as a spy, feeding the Order critical intelligence about Voldemort's movements. His surveillance of Sirius Black's location and his coded reports to Dumbledore hinted at quiet competence, yet he was more a silhouette gliding through the margins than a force driving the conflict forward. The books gave readers small, telling details, like the line describing him as a tall black wizard with a deep voice, but withheld the grand demonstrations of skill the films would later seize upon. The movies reshaped this quiet mastery into something kinetic and unmistakable, particularly in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Part 1, Kingsley is front and center during the daring escape from Privet Drive, riding his broom with a poise that makes the chaos around him seem almost trivial. As Death Eaters swarm like vultures, he maneuvers with calm precision, casting defensive spells that flare bright against the dark sky. When the camera sweeps past him, there is no doubt that here is a wizard of exceptional command, someone who stands on equal footing with Mad-Eye Moody and Remus Lupin. It is a transformation from a respected operative to a heroic combatant whose power cannot be denied. This contrast emerges even more vividly during the Battle of Hogwarts, where the films lift Kingsley into a visible position of leadership. While the book Deathly Hallows recounts that Kingsley fought bravely and duelled alongside Professor McGonagall and Horace Slughorn against Voldemort himself, the narrative rarely lingers on his maneuvers or spells. Instead, Rowling summarizes these moments quickly, as in the line, Kingsley and McGonagall were dueling Voldemort, without elaboration. The film adaptation, however, carves out space for his presence, showing him striding across the Great Hall, commanding groups of fighters, and repelling curses with elegant sweeps of his wand. This expansion from textual mention to cinematic spectacle transforms Kingsley into one of the most formidable duelists on screen. The power of his portrayal comes not merely from the choreography, but from how his authority is visualized. In the movie's staging of the final battle, Kingsley wears flowing azure robes that catch the firelight of exploding curses. He appears almost elemental, an embodiment of the Order's resilience. When he raises his wand to shield fleeing students from falling rubble, the moment underscores the protective might that the books only implied. Here is a leader whose strength is visible and unambiguous, a man who has become the anchor of the resistance within Hogwarts' shattered walls. One particular scene crystallizes this divergence between the written and the filmed character: the preparation for the Battle of the Seven Potters. In the book, Kingsley's contributions are largely tactical, his deep voice simply confirming plans with the calm of a veteran. The text reads, "We're all agreed then," said Kingsley, "we'll leave in pairs." It is a moment of quiet consensus, more about procedure than heroism. But in the film, the atmosphere hums with danger, and Kingsley's presence commands attention. As he surveys the room of decoys and protectors, his measured cadence and keen gaze project the quiet assurance of a commander who expects to survive and who will accept no failure from his companions. The film's visual language turns this moment of logistics into a testament to his iron composure. During the flight from Privet Drive, Kingsley's duel with the pursuing Death Eaters becomes one of the movie's most arresting sequences. His broom slices through the cold night, bolts of light blasting from his wand in rapid succession. The choreography gives him a grace and decisiveness that elevate him above the role of a supporting fighter. The camera cuts to his face, unwavering, as he hurls back a jet of green that narrowly misses Nymphadora Tonks. Though the book recounts this confrontation in passing, the film grants Kingsley a showcase of skill worthy of a legend. In that instant, his strength is not second-hand knowledge, it is a lived, cinematic fact. Throughout the series, the books depict Kingsley as a professional spy, a man whose subtlety is as potent as his magic. When he modifies the Muggle Prime Minister's memories in Half-Blood Prince, the text emphasizes discretion and stealth. Shacklebolt gave the Prime Minister a friendly smile. This small gesture masks a web of magical influence. The films, by contrast, favor explicit demonstrations of power. In Order of the Phoenix, during the escape from the Ministry, Kingsley's deflection of a killing curse, captured in a single, fluid motion, cements him as a warrior rather than merely a diplomat. He strides through danger with the certainty of someone who has trained for this war all his life. His commanding voice, so often described in the books as deep and reassuring, finds a new potency in the movies. When he issues orders, others respond without hesitation. At Hogwarts, when he shouts for everyone to fall back behind the battlements, the camera lingers on the deference in the eyes of the fighters. Even seasoned wizards like Arthur Weasley and Bill Weasley fall into line under his direction. This visual hierarchy elevates Kingsley's role, making him not only a peer of the Order's most respected members, but occasionally their de facto general. The adaptation's emphasis on Kingsley's combat prowess also reframes how audiences interpret his previous appearances. In Order of the Phoenix, when he calmly manipulates the Ministry's pursuit of Sirius Black, it feels retrospectively like the work of a man whose strategic mind and magical ability are equally honed. The film's presentation suggests that Kingsley is the Order's ace in the hole, an operator whose presence can tilt any confrontation. This reading is harder to extract from the books alone, which favor collective effort over individual feats. One of the most striking contrasts lies in the final confrontation with Voldemort. In the book, Rowling writes that Voldemort was dueling 3 opponents at once: Kingsley, McGonagall, and Slughorn. The moment is powerful, yet the prose offers few flourishes to describe how Kingsley's skill matched the Dark Lord's. The film, however, grants Kingsley an extended sequence, parrying Voldemort's onslaught with a precision that feels almost choreographed. Sparks spray across the Great Hall floor as he deflects a curse that could have ended the fight in a heartbeat. The viewer understands at once that this is not an ordinary aura, but a wizard whose power stands near the pinnacle. Kingsley's prominence in the movies also serves a symbolic function. He becomes a visual emblem of the Order's endurance, a reminder that the Ministry's corruption did not extinguish every honorable aura. When he strides across the rubble-strewn courtyard, the survivors rally around him, buoyed by the certainty that he will not yield. It is a role the books never fully illuminated. There, Kingsley is critical but peripheral. On screen, he is essential. Even his demeanour carries an amplified sense of authority. In the books, Kingsley's deep voice is a soothing instrument, delivering reassurance as much as commands. The line from Order of the Phoenix, "You're playing a dangerous game, Dumbledore," captures his wry intelligence but does not convey the gravitas the films insist upon. Actor George Harris infuses Kingsley with a stoic confidence that implies the outcome of any battle is never in doubt if he is present. It is a performance that redefines the character's legacy. By foregrounding Kingsley's martial capabilities, the films offer audiences a rare opportunity to see what might have happened had the books lingered longer on his duels and stratagems. He is no longer merely the capable aura working behind the scenes. He becomes a champion whose exploits stand beside those of Mad-Eye Moody or Professor McGonagall. This reinterpretation enriches the tapestry of resistance, adding a pillar of strength that anchors the Order's defiance. Ultimately, the films do not contradict the books so much as complete them. They reveal the force and leadership the text hints at, but never fully showcases. For every passage that merely describes Kingsley as a skilled aura, the movies provide a tableau of incandescent spellfire and unshakable composure. The contrast makes him one of the few characters whose cinematic incarnation feels unequivocally mightier than his literary one. Number 21. Narcissa Malfoy. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa Malfoy is introduced as a mother, so consumed by fear for her only son that she seeks help even from her family's enemies. Her desperation propels her to Spinner's End, where she begs Severus Snape to protect Draco from the task Voldemort has set. The book describes her as pale and trembling, with a fragile sort of dignity that makes her seem less like a cunning aristocrat and more like a woman cornered by destiny itself. J.K. Rowling paints Narcissa in strokes of maternal devotion. She is the epitome of a mother who would do anything to keep her child alive, yet she never appears powerful in the conventional sense. Her strength in the novel emerges almost exclusively through her family ties, her pleading, and her willingness to compromise her pride to save Draco. It is an intimate, nearly domestic portrayal, and it limits Narcissa's image to that of a secondary player in the vast conflict around her. When the story shifted to the screen, however, Helena Bonham Carter's Bellatrix and Jason Isaacs' Lucius were no longer the only Malfoys with a palpable sense of menace. The filmmakers allowed Narcissa, portrayed by Helen McCrory, to exude a different quality, a cool, resolute confidence that sets her apart from her literary counterpart. In the movies, Narcissa does not appear merely as a trembling mother. She is a woman capable of facing down the Dark Lord himself with unblinking poise. This is clearest in the forest scene from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, when Voldemort commands her to confirm Harry Potter's death. Here, her performance lifts the character out of the shadows of familial anxiety and into the realm of quiet, formidable power. The book version of this moment is simpler, almost subdued in its execution. Rowling writes, Narcissa Malfoy was staring into his Harry's face, and for a moment he thought she was going to call him a liar, but she merely whispered, "Is Draco alive?" This question, whispered in the dark, is her only line, and it emphasizes her all-consuming maternal instinct. After Harry's whispered confirmation that Draco lives, the narrative says simply, Narcissa Malfoy seemed to draw breath for the first time in weeks. She rises, tells Voldemort that Harry is dead, and leaves the scene without further ceremony. The power in the passage is profound, but limited to the private bond between a mother and her child. In the film, however, this moment expands into something more theatrical and commanding. When Narcissa kneels beside Harry's motionless form, the camera does not treat her as a nervous supplicant. She becomes the focal point, her expression framed in a combination of grief, calculation, and steely resolve. The hush that falls over the Death Eaters seems to magnify her presence. Her question about Draco is delivered in a taut, deliberate tone that feels almost like an interrogation. This slight change, her composure, her directness, transforms the scene. She appears to weigh the fate of two worlds in her mind before making her choice. In that instant, the audience witnesses not only a mother's love, but a shrewd, tactical mind operating behind the veil of maternal concern. What is remarkable is how the filmmakers infused her with a kind of moral autonomy that the novels only hinted at. In the books, Narcissa is not a Death Eater, and she never bears the dark mark. Her loyalty is to her family, not the cause, yet this distinction is often buried beneath her association with Lucius and Bellatrix. On screen, however, this nuance rises to the surface. Narcissa's decision to lie to Voldemort is portrayed as a deliberate, almost regal act of rebellion. The threat of immediate death does not cause her to falter. In fact, she is the only person in that entire forest who dares to deceive the dark Lord to his face. She does so without wand work, without violence, and without the protection of any ally. This is strength of a subtler kind, the kind that requires absolute self-possession and the ability to seize the single moment when survival depends on a single lie. Helen McCrory's portrayal imbues Narcissa with an undercurrent of authority that redefines her place in the saga. In the book, she is rarely described as particularly commanding. Her beauty and status are noted, but she is not feared or even especially respected outside her family circle. In the film, every glance she casts across the battlefield carries weight. Her black gown, her pale hair, the cold dignity in her expression, all of it suggests that she is a woman who could have held her own at any table of power. Where Lucius crumbles into guilt and Bellatrix dissolves into mania, Narcissa never loses her measured composure. It is a small but important shift that echoes through the rest of the story. In the film's interpretation, Narcissa becomes an avatar of quiet defiance. She refuses to sacrifice her son on the altar of Voldemort's vanity, even though she knows that betrayal could cost her life. This is not simply a display of maternal love, it is also a moment of personal conviction. The same woman who once pleaded with Snape now claims the authority to decide the fate of the boy who lived. The filmmakers understood that power can take many forms. Sometimes it is a spell cast with a wand, and sometimes it is a lie told so convincingly that even Voldemort believes it. This depiction also heightens the tension of the scene itself. In the novel, Harry experiences Narcissa's question almost as a reprieve, a brief moment of human connection amid the horror. In the film, the moment feels more like a high-stakes negotiation. The audience holds its breath as she inspects Harry's face, and when she finally declares him dead, it feels as if she has seized control of the narrative. For the first time, Voldemort's triumph is built on a foundation of deception laid by someone he considered beneath suspicion. This reversal grants Narcissa a measure of triumph that the book only implies. Even more striking is the way the film underscores her independence from Lucius. In the final battles, Lucius appears broken and diminished, a man who has lost everything he believed made him powerful. Narcissa, by contrast, stands upright, her shoulders squared. She does not cling to her husband's arm, nor does she seek reassurance from Voldemort's followers. The visual storytelling makes it clear her choice is her own. She is no longer just a satellite orbiting Lucius's ambitions or Bellatrix's fanaticism. She becomes her own force of will. Contrast between Narcissa's film and book personas also reveals something larger about how strength can be portrayed. In the novels, Rowling's approach is often to cloak her in the trappings of a tragic figure, a woman whose life has narrowed to a single desperate hope. The movies allow her to step beyond this role, to claim an identity rooted not only in fear but in purpose. She is not merely reacting to danger, she is deciding the outcome of the war in that clearing, and she does so with a clarity that borders on terrifying. This reimagined Narcissa stands as a reminder that bravery is not always loud or adorned with heroics. She never casts a single spell in that decisive scene. She does not duel or shout or threaten. Instead, she studies her enemy and discerns exactly what must be said. It is a kind of strength that has no need for spectacle. The fact that Voldemort accepts her word without question only reinforces how convincing and dangerous her quiet determination can be. In retrospect, this scene in the forest becomes one of the most consequential moments of the series. Because Narcissa lied, Harry was able to reach safety. Because she asked about Draco, she revealed that the Malfoys' loyalty was always conditional. The entire shape of the final battle shifts around her decision. On the page, this choice feels almost like an afterthought, an unexpected mercy that arrives in the chaos. On film, it feels like the climax of her character's hidden evolution, from a fearful mother to a woman who holds a war in her hands and makes her own verdict. This transformation would not have resonated so powerfully without Helen McCrory's performance. Her Narcissa is a study in restraint. Her eyes flicker but do not waver, her voice remains level, and her breathing is so measured that she appears carved from ice. It is this discipline that allows her to become, paradoxically, the most dangerous person in that forest. Even Voldemort, in all his supposed omniscience, fails to perceive her deception. The filmmakers captured this dimension with such precision that it permanently altered the audience's perception of Narcissa Malfoy. In the end, the film grants Narcissa a legacy that the books never quite fully explored. Her strength does not derive from her lineage, or her marriage, or her connection to the Dark Lord. It emerges from a simple, immutable fact. She knows what she values most, and she will not let anyone, not even Voldemort, stand in her way. This was the gift of the adaptation, to show that a woman who seemed peripheral in the novels could become, in the right moment, the story's most essential force. Number 22, Arthur Weasley. In the books, Arthur Weasley was never described as a formidable combatant. He was the man whose fondness for muggle plugs and batteries inspired endless affectionate eye-rolls from Molly and bewildered comments from his children. Readers met him first in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when he erupted in delight upon learning Harry could fly a car, declaring that this was brilliant, only to wilt under Molly's withering scolding. This Arthur always carried the gentle energy of a man more enchanted by curiosity than by confrontation. Yet in the films, his character acquired a quiet force that went beyond eccentricity, revealing a hidden steel whenever the safety of his family or the integrity of the Order of the Phoenix was threatened. The films imbued Arthur with a readiness to stand shoulder to shoulder with seasoned fighters like Kingsley Shacklebolt and Mad-Eye Moody, even though in the novels he mostly appears in domestic or administrative scenes. For example, in Order of the Phoenix, he is described leaving the burrow to perform guard duty, but the narrative does not linger on his actions. Arthur was on duty all night, Molly tells Harry, in a passing mention that implies a role but doesn't dramatize it. The films, on the other hand, put Arthur in the thick of the action when the Order escorts Harry from Privet Drive, showing him in the skies, wand blazing, fully equal to the mission. This visual portrayal contributed to this sense that Arthur was as much a combatant as a father, a duality that was never foregrounded in the text. Perhaps the most striking cinematic expansion of Arthur's role appears during the infiltration of the Ministry of Magic in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1. The book keeps Arthur off stage during this heist. He is mentioned briefly when Harry, disguised as Runcorn, overhears him being interrogated by Pius Thicknesser about subversive activities and blood traitor sympathies. The tension comes from Harry's fear of exposure rather than Arthur's own actions. But the film transforms this scenario into a moment of understated courage. Arthur's body language is wary but composed, his eyes calm despite the oppressive atmosphere. he radiates the controlled defiance of a man who has accepted the risk of open resistance and will not be broken by bureaucratic threats. This performance, more than any line of dialogue, elevates Arthur from a loving hobbyist to a quiet pillar of the Order. Arthur's defensive skill is also amplified in the cinematic battle of the Department of Mysteries. While the book simply states members of the Order had arrived and does not assign specific duels to Arthur, the film gives him a clear place in the line of defense against the Death Eaters. There is a moment when he duels Dolohov directly, holding his own with steady, confident wandwork and backing up Kingsley and Tonks in containing the attackers. The image of Arthur raising his wand to repel a jet of green light carries a gravity that the novels never fully bestow upon him. Viewers are shown, not merely told, that he is ready to risk everything for the cause, no less than Moody or Lupin. Even his posture in these scenes diverges from the mild stoop of his literary depiction. In the films, Arthur carries himself with a subtle alertness that hints at long years of vigilance. His wand is always at hand, and the camera work frames him as a figure of protection. The contrast with the book is significant because Rowling often portrays Arthur as the embodiment of domestic warmth, the father who repairs the chicken coop by magic and collects plugs in the shed. The text reserves most descriptions of combative prowess for characters like Sirius or Lupin, but the film version lets Arthur step into the archetype of the unassuming defender whose power becomes evident only in crisis. This creative decision is underscored by how Arthur interacts with Harry in the film adaptations. While the books depict Arthur offering guidance mainly about Muggle affairs, such as when he asks Harry about escalators in Goblet of Fire, the films often place Arthur beside Harry in moments of political tension. For instance, when Harry attends his disciplinary hearing in Order of the Phoenix, Arthur is portrayed as a protective presence, standing behind him with a grave expression. This physical solidarity reinforces the impression that Arthur is not merely curious or kindly, but also vigilant and resolute. It's a subtle shift that makes his character feel more layered. His calm determination is shown most vividly in the Ministry of Magic sequence from Order of the Phoenix. As the Death Eaters appear among the shattered prophecies, Arthur is framed with his wand lifted, shielding the children without hesitation. The cinematography emphasizes his steady breathing and unflinching gaze as curses explode around them. This visualization creates an indelible image of Arthur as a combat-ready protector. By contrast, the book devotes little attention to his emotional state in such situations. It simply lists him among the Order members and moves quickly to Harry's perspective. Even in non-combat settings, the films highlight Arthur's hidden strength. In Deathly Hallows, Part 1, when the Order gathers in the Burrow's kitchen before the Seven Potters operation, Arthur's face is composed but solemn, silently acknowledging the possibility that some of them will not return. His glance toward Molly communicates a shared acceptance of sacrifice. This moment, while never explicitly written in the books, resonates as a testament to Arthur's unspoken courage. It portrays him as the kind of man who will risk annihilation without complaint, simply because it is the right thing to do. The visual medium gives Arthur opportunities to express a protective ferocity that text alone does not convey. One can see this when he faces Lucius Malfoy in the Ministry atrium. The tension crackles between them as Arthur's jaw tightens and his wand shifts minutely in his grip. The novels describe Arthur's distaste for the Malfoys in terms of moral revulsion, but the films let him embody that conviction physically, standing as a quiet rebuke to Lucius's sneering elitism. It is an embodiment of defiance that feels more immediate than any passage of narration could render. Arthur's cinematic depiction as a seasoned defender is especially poignant because it expands the emotional stakes of the Weasley family. When he is attacked by Nagini in the Department of Mysteries, a scene shown in Order of the Phoenix, the film lingers on Molly's anguish and the children's horror, but it also frames Arthur's unconscious form as the fallen sentinel, His near death becomes a moment of collective dread, not merely because he is a father, but because he has proven himself indispensable to the resistance. This resonance deepens the audience's connection to his character in a way the text only implies. Yet the films never erase Arthur's endearing eccentricities. He still collects Muggle trinkets and struggles with telephones, but these traits coexist with his hidden valor. This duality makes his film portrayal richer. He is both the gentle father who teaches Harry how to use a ticket machine and the steadfast guardian who faces Death Eaters without blinking. The books emphasize the former more strongly, but the visual storytelling rebalances the scales to honor Arthur's understated heroism. When comparing the two portrayals, it is instructive to recall a line from Order of the Phoenix that captures the heart of Arthur's character. "You're a good person, Arthur," Dumbledore says, "always ready to act for what you believe is right." The novels state this in plain words, but the films dramatize it in images, wand raised, feet braced, eyes unyielding. The audience does not have to be told he is courageous, they see it for themselves. In the climactic moments of the series, Arthur's presence gains a weight that foreshadows the sacrifices to come. When the Battle of Hogwarts begins in Deathly Hallows, Part 2, Arthur stands amid the defenders, his face set in grim resolve. Though the books note his participation only briefly, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were both fighting. The film shows Arthur dueling fiercely beside his sons, no longer just the ministry worker with an unusual hobby, but a fully realized warrior in his own right. This interpretation adds a dimension of generational legacy. The visual medium suggests that Fred and George, Bill and Charlie inherited not only their father's curiosity, but also his quiet strength. Watching Arthur hold the line during Voldemort's assault, the viewer understands that the Weasley children's bravery did not appear from nowhere. It was modeled for them by the man who once puzzled over rubber ducks, yet never hesitated to stand in the path of darkness. While some purists might argue that this amplification drifts from Rowling's more restrained depiction, it is hard to deny the emotional impact. Arthur Weasley's transformation from genial hobbyist to stalwart defender underscores one of the saga's central truths, that true courage often comes in unexpected forms. The films, by expanding his role in combat and deepening his aura of quiet determination, offer a tribute to that idea. The effect is to make Arthur not only more formidable, but more fully alive to viewers who have come to love him as both a father and a fighter. Number 23, Cho Chang. In the world that J.K. Rowling shaped with such relentless detail, Cho Chang was never truly drawn as a warrior. Her presence in the pages of Order of the Phoenix was most often a soft blur of grief and uncertainty, a girl marked by loss and tangled feelings. When Cedric Diggory died at Voldemort's hands, Cho became the symbol of a young person's fragile sorrow, of a life interrupted by forces too dark to comprehend. Rowling let her grief unfold in halting conversations and tears shed behind books in the library. Harry noticed her as the girl who cried quietly near a window, not as the fighter who took up her wand in defiance of tyranny. It was not until the film adaptation that Cho's image shifted from the shaded corners of heartbreak into the bright center of Dumbledore's army, her wand raised and her face set in determination. This transformation gave her a strength that the books only implied in passing lines. One of the most significant differences lay in how Cho's capabilities were presented during the clandestine lessons in the Room of Requirement. In the novel, she is certainly a participant, but her skill with spells is not elaborated upon in a way that elevates her above the others. She is there, attentive, sometimes hesitant, sometimes distracted by her lingering grief. The reader observes her fumbling with her emotions, as when she tells Harry, "I thought you'd understand," after one of their arguments. About Cedric. But the narrative does not pause to marvel at her competence as a witch. In the movie, however, she is shown practicing defensive spells, with an evident focus that the book never quite emphasized. The camera follows her more closely as she hurls a stunning spell with enough confidence to make viewers believe she has found purpose in this secret rebellion. It is impossible to ignore how David Yates's adaptation of Order of the Phoenix revised her character with deliberate subtlety. In the novel, Cho is weighed down by guilt and longing, a girl who seems always on the edge of tears. But on screen, Katie Leung's portrayal suggests that Cho is beginning to transform that grief into action. When the members of Dumbledore's army line up to learn Expelliarmus, she stands near. The front, her posture assertive. Her wand movements are crisp, precise, almost eager. This is not the same Cho who dissolves in tears after kissing Harry. This is someone who is channeling her mourning into resistance. The film crafts a version of Cho who becomes emblematic of Hogwarts' young defiance. One striking example of this more assertive Cho appears during the montage of the DA training sessions. As Harry guides the group through shield charms and disarming spells, the camera lingers on Cho executing a perfect Protego. The shield flickers bright blue as it deflects a jinx that Neville Longbottom casts. In the book, Neville's progress is often highlighted, but Cho's practice is usually relegated to the background, overshadowed by her emotional turmoil. The film, in contrast, brings her forward, offering a glimpse of her as a competent witch whose skill makes her an asset, not just a distraction to the cause. This detail, though fleeting, changes the tone of her role in the resistance entirely. Another moment that subtly reinforced Cho's strength is the scene in which the DA members are discovered by Dolores Umbridge's inquisitorial squad. In the book, Cho is indirectly responsible for the betrayal because Marietta Edgecombe, her friend, reveals the secret under the influence of a jinxed parchment. Cho herself is never portrayed as treacherous, but her closeness to Marietta stains her relationship with Harry and the others. The film simplifies this subplot, eliminating Marietta altogether and placing Cho in the uncomfortable position of being forced to, comme you all, give up the DA under the influence of Veritaserum. While some fans disliked this change, it inadvertently gave Cho more narrative weight. She was not just a bystander to Marietta's cowardice, she became a victim of Umbridge's cruelty, which in turn reinforced the impression that she was deeply involved in the fight, rather than hovering on its periphery. In the novel, Cho is described in softer terms, her distress colouring every encounter with Harry. There is little suggestion that she has an unshakable resolve. Even after the dissolution of Dumbledore's army, her actions are portrayed as reactions rather than decisions. She grieves Cedric, she quarrels with Harry, she is swept up by the tidal forces of Voldemort's return. Yet in the film, every glance and movement hints at an inner strength trying to surface through her sorrow. When she takes her place among the others to practice the Patronus charm, she stands firm, her eyes bright with determination. While the book only briefly mentions that her Patronus is a swan, the film shows her conjuring it alongside the others, her expression almost serene, as if in that moment she has chosen to belong to something larger than her own sadness. Even her demeanour during lessons with Harry becomes more assertive on screen. When he walks among the students, correcting their wand positions and offering encouragement, Cho meets his eyes with a look of earnest concentration, not the trembling uncertainty of the girl in the book. This detail, though minor, alters how viewers perceive her role in the DA. She is no longer simply a love interest whose tears complicate the hero's journey. She is a student warrior in her own right, ready to stand with Hermione, Neville, and Luna in open defiance of the Ministry's lies. The decision to spotlight Cho's skill during these training sequences was no accident. It was a conscious effort to enrich her character beyond the constraints of adolescent heartbreak. When the book introduces Cho, she is a Quidditch seeker for Ravenclaw, admired for her grace on a broom. Yet even this talent is rarely shown in a way that suggests she possesses the same fierce spirit as the main trio. Her sporting ability becomes an afterthought once the narrative shifts toward her grief for Cedric. In contrast, the film adaptation seems to remember that a Quidditch seeker is, by nature, a competitor accustomed to risk and courage. This quality translates onto the screen in her disciplined spellwork and the way she carries herself among the other DA members. It is as though the filmmakers chose to emphasize that she was never meant to be defined solely by loss. Rowling did give Cho brief moments of confidence in the text. She volunteers to sign her name on the DA parchment. She is among the first to practice disarming spells, but these instances are overshadowed by the emotional tension with Harry. In the book, their date in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop is a disaster of awkward silences and misunderstood intentions, a scene that cements Cho in the reader's mind as a tragic figure. "I came here with Cedric," she admits in a raw confession that deflates any chance of happiness. The film includes this thread of sadness but refuses to let it define her entire identity. When the montage of training sequences unfolds, Cho is not weeping over Cedric's memory. She is raising her wand against a tyranny that took him from her. It is this shift in focus, away from her role as Harry's bereaved girlfriend and toward her position as an active resistor, that makes film Cho feel stronger than her literary counterpart. In visual storytelling, an expression or a gesture can communicate layers of purpose and resolve that a few lines of dialogue may fail to capture. Katie Leung's performance carries a steady undercurrent of conviction that often eludes the printed page. When she performs a defensive spell or stands watchfully beside Hermione, she projects a competence that readers of the books must work harder to imagine. The filmmakers also appear to have made a conscious decision to place Cho among the core group of students who consistently show up in training sessions. In the book, Cho's attendance fluctuates, and she eventually drifts away after her falling out with Harry. The film compresses time and condenses events, so she remains a visible presence for much longer. This choice repositions her as a near-constant ally in the struggle against Umbridge and Voldemort's return. It creates the impression that Cho's loyalty to Dumbledore's army endures despite the heartbreak, painting her as braver than her book incarnation. It is easy to overlook these changes because they do not involve new dialogue or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they are embedded in small choices, the way Cho holds her wand as she faces down the practice dummies, the determined set of her jaw as Umbridge prowls the corridors, the steadiness of her voice when she answers Harry's questions. The cumulative effect is to endow her with a dignity that the book rarely highlights. She becomes, in these quiet moments, not merely the grieving girl, but an equal among the young fighters who will later march to the Department of Mysteries. This elevation of Cho's character in the film serves another narrative purpose. It underlines the idea that Hogwarts itself is full of young witches and wizards ready to resist. The book often narrows its gaze to Harry, Hermione, and Ron, whose storylines eclipse many other students. By showing Cho as a determined participant, the film reminds audiences that the struggle belongs to many, not just a chosen few. It also implies that Cedric's death did not break her spirit entirely, but instead galvanized her into action, a thematic nuance that the books only brush against. One final visual that captures Cho's newfound strength comes when she stands among the ranks of the DA as Harry delivers his encouragement. In the novel, this scene passes quickly, the focus squarely on Harry's growth as a teacher. The film, however, lets the camera pause on Cho's face, her eyes bright with resolve. It is a simple image, a girl who has suffered, standing ready to fight, yet it transforms her from a symbol of sorrow into a portrait of quiet, determined bravery. Number 24, Lavender Brown. Lavender Brown, a name that often drew smirks or dismissive laughter among Harry Potter readers, was never meant to be the pillar of strength in the saga's sprawling cast. In the books, she was depicted primarily through the narrow lens of Ron Weasley's brief and rather embarrassing romantic entanglement. She was the girl who scribbled hearts around R+L and gushed about 1-1 to anyone within earshot, reducing her to a stereotype of a teenage girl intoxicated by first love. Yet in the film adaptations, particularly in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, Lavender sheds much of that comedic skin and emerges in the chaos of Hogwarts' final stand as a figure of quiet bravery. Her presence on the battlefield, wand raised, eyes focused on the marauding Death Eaters, grants her a measure of dignity and purpose that the novels largely withhold. The books make scant mention of Lavender's courage. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, her emotional world revolves almost entirely around Ron, and when their relationship collapses, so too does her narrative importance. Even in the Deathly Hallows, where nearly every student is galvanized into resistance, Lavender exists more as a footnote than a participant. She is described fleetingly in the climactic moments when Fenrir Greyback attacks her, but before that, her role as a defender of Hogwarts is never emphasized. The text reads, "The creature reared back, and Harry saw that it was Greyback." Lavender Brown was lying motionless on the ground. That single image, tragic and brief, is the sum of her contribution to the defense. She is a casualty, not a fighter, and the books allow no more space to her story. Contrast this with the visual power of her portrayal in the film's final battle, where Lavender's face is set in determined lines, her wand movements precise as she hurls defensive spells into the fray. Her participation is not a momentary glimpse, but part of a montage of resistance, the camera lingering just long enough to acknowledge that she, like so many others, has cast aside adolescent trivialities to stand against Voldemort's forces. While she is ultimately struck down, her fate remains the same. The film elevates her to a combatant who fought back. She is not simply the lovesick girl who lost her life. She is one of the many who chose to defend the castle she called home. This subtle yet significant expansion gives Lavender's character an arc she sorely lacked in the novels. The films recognize that even those who seemed shallow or foolish can reveal hidden reserves of courage when the world demands it. In one sweeping shot, she moves alongside Parvati Patil, another classmate often relegated to background detail, both of them fighting as equals beside the more celebrated members of Dumbledore's army. Their wands emit streams of light, their spells clashing with the dark curses hurled back at them. For a moment, the audience is reminded that Hogwarts is not defended solely by its stars, but by every student, no matter how easily dismissed. This choice by the filmmakers not only redeems Lavender from her one-note portrayal, but also underscores a larger truth about war, that it transforms even the most unlikely people. When she first appeared in the series, she was introduced as a small, eager girl in Gryffindor, her main distinction being her fondness for divination and her tendency to giggle. Few could have predicted she would one day hold the line against Death Eaters alongside Hermione Granger and Neville Longbottom. In the books, that transformation is invisible. In the films, it is quietly, respectfully shown. The contrast is especially striking when you consider the aftermath of her relationship with Ron. The books depict her as almost pitiable, crying in corners and shooting him tearful looks across the Gryffindor common room. She never regains the reader's respect. Yet in the films, her heartbreak becomes just one part of her identity, not the whole of it. When the time comes to defend Hogwarts, she answers the call without hesitation. This decision allows viewers to see her as a young woman capable of growth and resilience, rather than as a cautionary tale about adolescent infatuation. Even the visual language used in the final battle grants Lavender a measure of grace. As the camera pans across the great hall, littered with debris and lit by the flickering glow of wandfire, Lavender stands in a defensive stance, her hair disheveled, but her focus unbroken. She is not waiting to be rescued. She is part of the shield that keeps Voldemort's army from overrunning the castle. This simple choice, to show her fighting, cements her as a more dimensional figure than the novels ever allowed. One can argue that the film's decision to emphasize her participation is a small change, but in a story as sprawling as Harry Potter's, small changes matter. They are the difference between a character remembered only for her crush and a character remembered also for her courage. When readers look back on Lavender in the books, they recall her clinging to Ron's arm, pouting in the corridors and sobbing into her pillow. When film viewers look back, they see a girl who, in her final hours, chose to fight. This is not to suggest that the books are flawed in their depiction. J.K. Rowling's narrative has its own internal logic, in which Lavender serves a particular purpose, to highlight the follies of young romance and to test Ron's emotional maturity. But it is equally true that the films had an opportunity to broaden that purpose and took it. In doing so, they honored Lavender's Gryffindor identity in a way the text only implied. She was sorted into Gryffindor for a reason after all, and the films made sure audiences would understand why. Consider also the context of her last moments. In the book, her death is abrupt, almost casual in its brutality. She falls beneath Greyback's claws, and Harry barely has time to note her motionless form before he must move on. The narrative leaves her behind as the action barrels forward. But in the film, her fall is given a kind of tragic clarity. When she is attacked, there is a deliberate pause, enough to acknowledge her sacrifice, to remind the audience that every casualty in this war has a name and a story. Even though her role in the defense was small, it existed, and that matters. Lavender's enhanced presence also serves as a counterbalance to the story's more famous heroes. It is easy to admire Hermione's brilliance, Neville's valor, or Harry's destiny, but the film's decision to show Lavender standing her ground suggests that heroism is not the exclusive province of the protagonists. It can emerge in characters once regarded as trivial. The effect is both poignant and humbling, a reminder that in times of crisis, almost anyone can find the strength to fight. In some ways, Lavender's portrayal in the film is an apology of sorts, a recognition that her character deserved more than the punchline status the books afforded her. She was not simply a love-struck girl with a flair for dramatics. She was a young witch who grew up in the shadow of war, who learned to set aside her own disappointments and stand with her friends when it mattered most. It is an affirmation that no character is too minor to have an impact. When audiences recall the climactic defense of Hogwarts, they remember the familiar faces, McGonagall conjuring animated suits of armor, Molly Weasley dueling Bellatrix Lestrange, Harry and Voldemort locked in their final struggle. But tucked among those legendary images is Lavender, standing in the rubble, wand in hand, determined to protect her home. This vision lingers because it feels right, because it restores to her the dignity that the books in their hurry denied her. It is a testament to the power of adaptation that such a small shift can reshape our understanding of a character. The films remind us that Lavender Brown was never merely the girl who draped herself over Ron Weasley's shoulders. She was a Gryffindor to her last breath, and when the darkness came, she did not hide. She fought, and in that moment, she became stronger than her version in the books ever had a chance to be.